A brief history of God. Let me introduce one François-Marie Arouet and one of his most famous thoughts. Si Dieu n'existait pas, il faudrait l'inventer. For those who don't speak French, we are probably more familiar with this guy as Voltaire and his idea, if God did not exist, we'd have to invent him. Now, whether Voltaire was actually saying this with his tongue firmly in his cheek is perhaps something we'd better not speculate on, but Voltaire was a very clever man. So this is a brief history of God, and from one of the versions of the Bible we have the quote, "God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." Not particularly well written perhaps, but the important thing here is the idea that God created man. Well, I'm afraid in this particular history of God we tend to take the opposite point of view. I'm afraid that in our view, man created God. And in fact, that's what this brief history is all about. And we're going to look at 5 words which explain why man created God. By which I mean, why we bothered to create God. What was our motivation? The 5 words are fear, capitalism, sleep, politics, and evolution. An unlikely quintet perhaps, but you'll come to understand why we have these 5 words over the next few minutes. So first of all, we're going to start with fear. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was... Yikes! Perhaps a rather old-fashioned expression of fear. One from Billy Bunter, perhaps. But fear was a major driving force in all our lives, not just in the creation of God. Early man understood almost nothing and was afraid of almost everything. This was a good idea, because being afraid of everything helps to keep you alive. If you're afraid of everything and you try and avoid it and stay out of the way, hopefully your hopes for staying alive are improved. But not understanding and always being afraid is very uncomfortable. Nothing helps this though, like a bit of explanation about what is happening and why it is happening to you. But without any real science, such explanations relied almost wholly on imagination. In trying to explain things that were caused by invisible forces such as gravity, wind, electromagnetism, etc., our remote ancestors created stories of invisible entities which caused these things to happen. And so the first animistic gods were born. These invisible entities became our gods. These gods could be anything: a tree, a stone, a mountain, a celestial body, a fish, or the wind. But they quickly took on human characteristics and recognizable names, as people sought to make them understandable and tried to influence them. The key words here are understandable and influence. Having created the idea of these entities in a bid to explain the capricious nature of nature, it became necessary to explain how the gods worked and how we might be able to modify their behavior to our own benefit. And so, to interpret what the gods did and to explain how we might appease them, the first shaman came into being, and what we now call religion began. So, God was created in man's image, and then credited with all the strange things we could not understand or control. Now let's talk about capitalism. And we start with an interesting proposition. Capitalism is the natural state of man. Now, many people will argue with this. They might be affronted by this suggestion. But it seems to me that this is obviously true. Let's consider capitalism for a moment. Though we often see a connection, greed is not caused by capitalism. Rather, it is caused by man's natural competitive spirit. Capitalism is born from hope, not from greed. Let's look at this in more detail. Everyone hopes that next year will be better than this year, and of course, that this year will be better than last year. So someone might say, next year, I hope I will be able to buy enough food for my children. Later, they might say, I hope I will be able to buy healthier food for my children. And then they might say, I hope I will be able to buy proper dental care for my children. And then, I hope I will be able to afford a better school for my children. And then, for those who are tired of the school run, they might say, I hope I will be able to afford a second chauffeur for my children. These are all expressions of hope for a better life in the future. And that is where capitalism comes from. The ability to hope for a better future and the attitude to work towards a better future. That is the expression of capitalism. And capitalism is very closely related to God. Religion is, and always has been, big business. Forget Google, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and the mega banks. The biggest single financial entity in the world is still the Catholic Church. Microsoft recently hit a valuation of $1 trillion. $1 trillion is chump change to the Catholic Church. We have seen that the invention of God was all about fear and ignorance. But the enormous growth of religion in the last 2,000 years has all been about the money. Here's an example from the early ages of religion, someone might have said, "Don't worry, I will interpret the wishes of the fire mountain for you." But unfortunately, that means I won't have time to go out and hunt or look after the farm. So if you feed me and look after me, I'll try to make sure the fire mountain looks after you. One of the very early expressions of exchanging, shall we say, religious advice for food and money. The rise of capitalism and God. Here's another somewhat later statement. Yes, you're right. All of our priests have taken a vow of poverty. But we urgently need to be able to protect them and feed them and train them and send them out to bring others into the faith. So just make a large cash donation now and leave us some land when you die, and we'll make sure of your place in paradise. No matter how badly you behave in this life, you'll be okay in the next. And then, somewhat later, perhaps, the religious person might say, "Why am I so fat? I guess I've just got big bones." Then the last one, perhaps more modern. "Look, this religion is designed to be real easy. All you have to do is give us 10% of everything you earn each year, and you're in." What do you get out of it? Well, that's simple too. You get membership of the club. You get to mix with other like-minded people who can help you in all kinds of ways. It's just like a big social network. And the really great thing is you can offset what you give us against taxes. So it's just like membership. It's free, really. It's a win-win. The modern face of capitalism and God. So, capitalism played a fundamental part in the design of God, and it has also played a huge part in his outrageous success and popularity. So now let's have a look at sleep. What does sleep have to do with the history of God? Every night we fall asleep, and every morning we wake up and carry on with our lives. Because we are so used to this pattern, it can be very difficult to imagine not waking up. Because of the persistence of experience through the sleep-wake-sleep cycle, most people find it difficult to accept death as the final termination of experience. Never shy of taking advantage of human weaknesses, of course, God's designers very quickly come up with the idea that death is in fact merely a transition to another set of experiences, which can be either good or bad, depending on your relationship with their God. The idea of the afterlife became a fundamental part of our God design very quickly, because it provided such an ideal leverage point. So a conversation, once again, might go, "You're worried about death? You find it hard to accept the end of experience? No problem. Believe in me, and I will A. ensure you continue to experience things after death, B. ensure you have happy experiences after death, and C. by the way, if you don't believe in me, you will still have experiences after death, but I guarantee you won't enjoy them." And then a special quick note on God. God, of course, would never allow the questions, "Where do you, God, come from?" or "Where do you go to?" God is pitched as the answer to all our questions, but his answers require no proof, and he himself, of course, has to be unquestionable. For that way lies the God killer, doubt. So, In addition to the pre-existing creation myths that were encapsulated in the god designers' attempts to answer the question, where do we, humanity, come from? They also come up with the paradise motif, as they sought to provide the answer to the question, where do we go to? God was of course always designed to be the cradle to grave and beyond answer, because only through the ability to manipulate the whole of an individual's life could he truly control how every individual and their society spent their money, which was always the God designer's ultimate goal. So now let's talk about politics. Man, of course, is a political animal. And so, no sooner had we created God than he became one of the most important focus points of political manipulation. For many centuries, there was a primacy battle between crown, state, and church. Today, in most Western countries, the crown has now fallen out of the three-way split, and the church too has become less important in terms of political power. Not entirely unimportant, but certainly less important. However, outside Europe and the Americas, religion continues to be a very strong player in the political arena, especially where more naive, fundamentalist beliefs are still strong. But politics has strongly influenced the design of God. Early versions of God were, of course, themselves pretty naive, but soon the necessities of political influence meant that much more sophisticated versions of God had to be imagined. The move from polytheism to monotheism in particular required a great deal of political jockeying. In order to compete with state and crown for financial dominance, it became necessary to manipulate belief systems in ways specifically designed to keep the money rolling in. God has, of course, always had to move with the times. In order to keep the faithful faithful, God designers have always been expert at changing the rules and the explanations in order to cope with social fads such as feminism and human rights. The point of creating God was always to provide top-down control of the population. The whole rationale behind creating God was to provide a psychological tool for manipulating the fearful and largely ignorant masses. Sometimes this suited the purposes of the crown or state, and sometimes their positions were opposed. There has always been tension between them. The design of God has always tried to make it appear that God is above mere earthly politics. In fact, though, the design and constant redesign of God has always been aimed at making him as valuable as possible a political tool. Unquestionable, beyond reproach, and beyond any human concept of law, culpability, or responsibility. So now let's talk about evolution. Some people think that evolution and religion are opposed, but in fact, evolution is an important and fundamental part of religion. We've seen this before. Early man understood almost nothing and was afraid of almost everything. This is a good idea because being afraid of everything helps to keep you alive. This is evolution in action. Being afraid helps those who are most afraid and are most successful at hiding and protecting themselves, helps them to stay alive. Evolution in action. There's another element to this, of course. Man is a herd animal. Just look at a football ground, or look at our cities. And this is also a good idea. Staying within the herd and being prepared to fight to make the herd stronger are very strong survival traits. And evolution influenced the design of God. God was designed to maximize tribalism, and religion in general has pursued this trend relentlessly. So evolution explains the creation of God. Belief in God is a strong survival trait, simply because religious herds are amongst the largest and strongest herds that people can elect to be part of. Of course, being a part of one of these religious herds also has its downside. However, so long as the religious herds keep bombing and murdering members of competing herds, as evolution and tradition demands, they do, at least for the most part, leave the less simple-minded to get on with their own lives. So these are the 5 words that explain the creation of God. Why man created God. First of all, he created God because of fear. Fear brought about the idea of God, these invisible entities that cause things to happen. Capitalism financed the development of God. The design of God was all about making sure the money kept rolling in. Sleep, which does seem like an odd one, but that's a fundamental part of the creation of God. It reinforced the acceptance of God, and specifically the God's idea of the afterlife, because we found it difficult, humans in general find it difficult, to contemplate the idea of zero experience after death. Politics is fundamental to the design and the constant redesign of God. And then evolution explains the existence and the persistence of the idea of God. Evolution explains how God was created out of fear and why we continue with the idea of God simply because of our herd instincts and the evolutionary value that the herd instinct brings. So, at the end, we must ask the question, when will God die? Well, that's a problem. The idea of God should have died with the invention of the optical lens, or with the invention of the printing press and wide-scale education, or the invention of the electric light and wide-scale industrialization, or the internet, the information revolution. But the God designers are still out there tweaking and modifying the idea of God to meet all of these different challenges. So, we must come up with the question at the end, when will God die? And the answer to that, I'm afraid, is God only knows.